Hello and welcome to another amazing episode of the Bible in 1 year with the preacher's husband. Today we're talking about First Chronicles chapter 23, 24, and 25. Tomorrow we're going to talk about Psalm 131, 138, 139, 143, 144, and 145. That'll be our reading for tomorrow. So we're going to dig in here and I'll just tell you my studies today took a complete tangent from what we're really supposed to do. But we'll start anyway. Chapter 23 of First Chronicles starts out, says, when David was old and full of days, he installed his son Solomon as king over Israel. Then he gathered all of the leaders of Israel, the priests and the Levites. Now David, he intended for Solomon to be the king after him. And he made this known to Solomon and to all of his advisors. Now he acted on this declaration and officially made Solomon a co-regent alongside him. So he was the king and David was the king as well for a time being. Despite David's public acclaim of Solomon, there would be vigorous dispute of this decision. And we'll read about this in 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2 when we start reading about Solomon. David reiterated that his will on this matter it's just gonna happen. He's mentioned it several times, and he mentions it even more in when we get to 1 Kings chapter 1. Basically what was happening here in chapter 23 is David is trying to set Solomon up for success. And that's essentially what he's doing. So we're going to move on to chapter 24. If anything else stuck out to you, just mention it in the comments and we'll talk about it. Right off the bat, this is about the divisions of the priests. Now, among all the divisions established at this time that David was putting together for Solomon, the most important one was probably the priests, and they were divided into 24 segments here. And it was actually reasonable because they were basically one of the families of priests had about 2-to-1 as far as population goes, so it made sense that they used 24 and then they divided them up. I believe it was 16 and 8, I believe is how it worked out. I could be wrong on that, but anyway, when they drew lots for the areas. So there's that drawing lots things that pop up again here. And then we get to 25. First Chronicles 25, and this is where my tangent started. So Verse 1, David and his officers basically set apart Asaph, Haman, and Jeduthun, who were to prophesy accompanied by lyres, harps, and cymbals, and perform their service. They were the musicians, okay? They were the musicians, and David was a man of music. We know that. He played the lyre amazingly. And those groups of instruments there, cymbals belonging to percussion, drums, that section, lyres and harps are stringed instruments. And what do we do in a lot of contemporary services today? Drums and guitars. It's not any different than lyres, harps, and cymbals that were going on back then. We get to verse 6 and it says, all these men were under their own father's authority for the music in the Lord's temple. So there's music in church. There's instruments with cymbals, harps, and lyres for the service of God's temple. The order of music was primarily David's innovation. Now, before David came along, there wasn't a ton of that happened. Most of that didn't happen, actually. Music in worship was a David thing. So it got me thinking. I was wondering, why in the world do some churches not have music in their worship services when it was such an integral part? From here on in the Old Testament, it was just... worship and music just went along hand in hand. There was not worship without music from this point on in the Old Testament, essentially. At least not until Jesus' time. So I got to thinking, why is that? So I looked it up and I found that there were actually 4 reasons why churches these days do not use musical instruments, and I'll just go through those for you. The first reason that churches today do not use musical instruments in their worship services is that They say the New Testament commands congregation singing and does not mention the playing of instruments for spiritual teaching, praise, and thanksgiving. Now, there's some truth to that. The New Testament does command congregations to sing. They do. And they do not mention playing instruments, but they do mention making music. How do you make music? Well, according to them, they say only with your mouth. That's all. But it doesn't say that in the Bible anywhere. They cite Ephesians 5:19 and Colossians 3:16. And I will tell you, I looked it up and I read it. Ephesians 5:19, and it basically says, don't get drunk with wine, which leads to reckless living, but be filled by the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making music with your heart to the Lord. Doesn't say don't use instruments. To me, it almost infers that you should. Colossians 3:16, the same. It just does not say anything about yes, you should or no, you shouldn't. So, second reason was the Bible forbids anyone from adding or annulling God's commands. Well, of course, you don't want people putting in or taking away from the commands of God. And they cite 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2. So I went and looked that up, and it basically is telling men and women how to wear their heads covered or uncovered. It's saying, men, never cover your heads when you're going to worship because you're the head of the family, blah, 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 and God is the head of the church. And then it says, women should cover their heads in worship. And I got to ask it, how many of you ladies in these churches that do not do music go there with a hat on? How many? Because if you ever go in without a hat on, the Bible, the very next verse says, you got to shave your head. You've got to shave your head. We have a whole lot of bald women out there if we did that now, wouldn't we? I just found it amusing. They also cite Galatians 3:15, Revelation 22:18 through 19, all of which do say don't add or take away from God's commands. And then it says, furthermore, Jesus is sinless and his words are without error. So no one should change his words. Then they cite John 6:63, Hebrews 4:15, and 1 Peter 2:22. The problem with that is none of these are Jesus saying don't use instruments, and none of these are Jesus saying use instruments. It has nothing to do with instruments, actually. So does that mean if the Bible does not say it's okay, then you just can't do it? That's interesting. I don't believe that. I just believe that it carried over from the Old Testament to New, because Jesus did not deny it. The third big reason, number 3 here, it says the New Testament teaches that words are essential to worshiping in song. It does, that is true. And that unknown languages and nonverbal sounds are excluded. Does not say excluded anywhere, but they cite 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 9 through 19. So I read this, and honestly, this entire section is about speaking in tongues and having an interpreter. And it's basically about being understood. It's not even about music at all. It's talking about being understood. And it says, basically, I'll put it into modern day terms. If your friend speaks Spanish and you speak English, if you're sitting here preaching the word of God to them in English and they don't speak a word of English, they speak Spanish, you're wasting your breath. You're not doing any good. You're not furthering God. You're not furthering Jesus's and God's purpose for them or for you, unless you have an interpreter. So see, this section here has nothing to do with that. It does have to do with being understood during worship, but it doesn't have anything to do with music. And number 4, the big number 4, it says, Jesus established worship in spirit and in truth. Yes, he did. I agree with that 100%. And then they go on to say, changing the Old Testament physical worship to New Testament spiritual worship. Yes, I agree with that too, but it says changing the Old Testament physical worship, including musical instruments, to spiritual worship with singing meaningful words only for teaching, praise, and thanksgiving without any musical instruments. No, the Bible does not say that anywhere. It is not in this Bible. It ain't in the CSB. It ain't in the King James. It ain't in the NIV. Nowhere in the Bible does it say this. Nowhere. Just doesn't. They cite John chapter 4, verse 21 through 24, Hebrews 13, verses 15 and 16, and 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. And not a single one of them verses have anything to do with that, really. It does say that Jesus established worship in spirit and truth, as opposed to the Old Testament physical worship. But it doesn't mention instruments at all. So it doesn't say you can, it doesn't say you can't. So what's your perspective on that? What do you think? I think music is music. We make music with musical instruments. So why not use music to worship God? If God thought it was okay for David to do it, why did he change his mind later and say, okay, don't use instruments anymore? He didn't. It's not in there. Sorry, guys. Music's good. So anyway, I hope this has touched you. If it has, click the like button and the subscribe button. And, of course, click the little jingle bell so you can get notified the next time I upload a video, which will be tomorrow, for another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the preacher's husband. I hope to see you then. Peace.